told Cheryl it'd be really funny if she sat in between the two of you. This is Ryan and Jolene Smith, both of whom I've known for over 20 years, which makes me old, not y'all. That makes me old. I was Jolene's youth minister at Southside Church of Christ in Rogers. Ryan, I met years ago when he was still in high school at Green Valley Bible Camp. So we have a long history together. They've also been a part of this church family. As a matter of fact, Ryan at one time was serving as one of our deacons here. So we have a unique connection with them. Cheryl and Scott Savage. Scott's not here this morning, but Cheryl is representing the two of them. They've been a part of our church family for several years as well. I knew Scott also at Green Valley Bible Camp many years ago. And so they have a special place in our church family as well. What we've asked them to do this morning, it wouldn't mean as much for me to tell you their stories. And so I'm going to allow them to do that this morning. And so Ryan and Jolene are going to share. They've been a part of both foster care and adoption. They're going to share kind of their experiences through the foster care process, and maybe some adoption too. And then Cheryl's going to share with you what she and Scott experienced in adopting their children. And then I have a few questions that I'm going to ask, and you can find them after worship is over. If you have even more questions, you can find them. They'll be out in our lobby, and you can ask them some more questions as well, okay? I'm going to kind of turn it over to you guys. Y'all have a mic that works, and just go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to do the introduction for Ryan and I. So our story goes back many, many years. When we first got married, we did not plan to be foster parents. We did not plan to be adoptive parents. We kind of planned on having 3, possibly 4 children. That was under discussion at the time. And we found ourselves at church on a Sunday morning, and just a small announcement was made that there was a need for foster parents at this particular congregation, and he didn't say very much about it. The announcement was over, and he sat down, but I was incredibly convicted. I've never experienced a moment like that in my life before, and I sat down and I wrote out this page-long dissertation, if you will, on why I thought that Ryan and I needed to consider becoming adoptive parents at the time, and I very hesitantly passed it to Ryan in church services and thought, this is going to go poorly. And I watched him read it. I watched him look up and think about it and flip over the paper, and I was like, here it comes. And I still remember the words. He said, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I thought the same thing during class and about you. And I was blown away. That was a sign from God for us, and confirmation that what was weighing heavy on my heart was also weighing heavy on Ryan's. And so we actually didn't start our adoption journey right off the bat. I like to do research, so I started a binder, and we talked about what that might look like in the future. And it was actually several years later, after we had Audrey, our oldest biological daughter, before we started trying to adopt. And we actually started that journey during the plant for Flagstone. And so we were excited about it. We were trying to adopt from overseas, and we said, what better way to share our excitement than to participate in what was then called Orphan Sunday, a national day to observe the crisis of orphans all over the world. And so we put that on for Flagstone, and we invited some people to come speak that I had never heard speak before, but we thought that they would be good. And one of them was my dear friend Ann, who works with the call, and she spoke about foster care. And after church services that day, Ryan and I discussed it and said, that might be something that we should look into later after this whole adoption thing works out perfectly the way that we planned. And and God had other plans. We've had heartbreak along the way. We've had difficulties along the way. That particular adoption did not work out for us, and it was devastating. But we've seen the power of God and the will of God working in our lives to continue to direct us in the path that He has led us to. And so we accelerated our foster care experience, and now, let's see, that was 2000 and 2007. We'll say it started in 2007. Now it's 10 years later, and we've gone from, thinking we were just going to have 3 biological kids to having only 2 bios and 5 adopted children and a big giant van to haul them all around in. And I think we're the better for it.
Hello. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Cheryl Savage, and I'm going to give you a brief introduction, or I think it's going to be brief, of our family and the process we went through for private adoption of both of our kids, Madeline and Noah. As Marshall mentioned, my husband Scott isn't here. Of course, this is the one weekend of the year he goes four-wheeling with his friends. If he was here, he would most certainly tell you that it is quite likely I will not make it through this without crying, but I am going to try. And I apologize. I'm not as good as Jolene. I had to write mine down because I would certainly forget something. Like Jolene, pursuing private adoption was not part of my plan when I dreamed of growing up, going to college, getting married, and starting a family. I'm a planner, a goal setter, and a list maker, and I like to accomplish things and check them off the list, even if it's just a mental list. I'm a dreamer. I can't help myself. When I think about the private adoption process we pursued both times, though, the lesson that God has and continues to teach me every day is found in Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, when he says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Logically, I believed these words before we even went through the adoption process, but I couldn't grasp how God's plan for our family would be any different than my own, because I'm a meticulous planner. He had a lot to teach me. A few years into our marriage, it was confirmed that we would not be able to have biological children of our own, but for some reason, that confirmation still didn't sway me from my determination. I just knew what a big and mighty and powerful God we serve, so he must be planning to use this as a way of showing his power, even when the doctor said that it wasn't possible. I was wrong. That wasn't God's plan. It took me a little while to come to grips with that verse and what it truly meant to believe that God had a better plan than I did. And that's what led us down the road to adoption. Luckily for us, there was an agency in the small town of Texas where I grew up, and a couple of their employees were members at the church congregation I grew up in. So Scott and I were able to get all of the information we thought we needed to begin this journey to becoming parents. I was back on track. I had new goals, new checklists, and things that needed to be accomplished. For those of you who are wondering, the horror stories of mountains of paperwork are true. Imagine a stack of paperwork you get from the mortgage company when buying a house, and then multiply it. Then add on top of that parenting classes, doctors for physicals, police stations for fingerprints, background checks, visits from social workers. None of that is really fun. It's humbling at times, but I knew it was getting us closer to our dream of becoming parents. And I just knew that after we got all through this seemingly endless list of tasks that Scott and I needed to accomplish before being approved to be adoptive parents, God's plan for our family would quickly be realized. I was wrong again. You know that saying that God won't give you more than you can handle? Yeah, that was another lesson I learned. In reality, 1 Corinthians 10:13 says that he will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. Apparently there's a difference. I didn't feel strong enough for the journey that he was taking us on, but I did feel strongly that it was, in fact, the path that he was leading us towards. See, it keeps going back to that same verse, "My ways are higher than your ways." What I couldn't see was that there was another one of God's children who would also find herself on a path that she didn't plan to be on, but she was looking to him for guidance, and he was carefully orchestrating our paths to intertwine at just the right time. By the time that Scott and I made it through all of the paperwork, we dotted all the I's, crossed all of the T's. We waited for 18 months for our first child to be born. To this day, it was the longest and hardest 18 months of our lives. But we held to the verse in Jeremiah 29:11 that says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. I knew deep in my soul this verse had to be true for Scott and I. So we continued to wait for God to reveal his plan. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon in October 2007, we got the call that our daughter had already been born 3 weeks earlier. Her sweet birth mother had chosen us to be her parents. I told you. All the legalities had already been taken care of, and we should be in Abilene, Texas on Friday morning at 9 a.m. to pick her up. Talk about a whirlwind. But it was our moment, and we were ready for it. We got to see what God had been planning all along. It wasn't a backup plan. God had planned our family from the beginning, and he had taught us what it looked like to fully trust in his plan, and it was so much better than anything we could have ever imagined. I don't like her sitting on the front row. Now, one might think that's a big enough story for me to have learned to rely on God and not question his plans for our family. I sure am glad he's a patient and loving God, though, because he clearly wasn't done teaching me yet. You see, after Madeline was a few years old, she started asking and praying for a baby sister, and God and I felt like we were ready to grow our family again, so we started down the adoption process once again. This time our family circumstances were different, and if you want to know some of the legalities and differences between different agencies, let me know, but in an effort to somewhat keep this a shorter story, we decided to use Bethany Christian Services here in Arkansas the second time. As we prayed for our second child, though, I just knew the second time would be easier. After all, we were more familiar with the process, and God had already taught me what I needed to learn through the long wait for Madeline, right? Yeah, not so. This time, we endured a wait of 2 years until becoming a family of 4. And if I thought it was hard to continue to pray for my own dreams to become a reality, exasperate that by listening to the daily prayers of your 3 to 5-year-old who wants nothing more than to be a big sister. I'm not kidding, y'all. She seriously prayed every single day for a baby sister. Luckily, we were eventually able to convince her to pray for a baby brother or sister. But talk about hard. How do you answer the questions from your child as to why it takes so long for God to make our baby? Or how much longer will it be? We didn't have those answers, and it was gut-wrenching. And I will tell you that during our wait to becoming a family of 4, we endured a failed adoption match, I assume similar to what the Smiths did. We were chosen by the birth mother to be the parents for her child, but it didn't work out, and that's a whole different level of pain, one that I can only equate to that of a miscarriage for those of you who have endured that heartache. God clearly didn't tell us that our road was going to be an easy one, but I still believed, as I always had, that he had plans to prosper our family, and obviously those plans were eventually realized. After waiting for 2 long years, we got to meet Noah's birth mother before he was even born. Maddie was with us, and she got to talk to her brother while he was still growing inside of Miss Brittany's tummy. And to this day, we exchange periodic updates with her. We love her dearly, as our lives would not be the same without her strength and courage. One funny side note, when we told Madeline that we were going to name her brother Noah, she was furious. She refused to call him by that name. She insisted that she was going to call him by his middle name, Jackson, because, quote, Noah sounded like a creepy old man from the Bible. And she didn't want people to think of her brother that way. Good news, though, when we were in the hospital on the day Noah was born, and Maddie got to see her brother for the first time, God's love showed up again. When the first words out of Madeline's mouth were, I changed my mind. I do like the name Noah. It's a good name for him. So that's it. That's how the Savages became a family of 4. And I guess the point that I would want to communicate to any of you would be that if you've ever felt the tugging deep inside of you to look into fostering or adoption, don't let your own plans or fears get in the way. Allow God to lead the way. I promise that the picture he's painting is far more beautiful than anything you could hope or imagine. And if fostering or adopting isn't already something that you feel God leading your family towards, it's okay. Love on a family who's going through the process. Be there for them when they need a shoulder to cry on, because they don't understand the road that they've been led down. But no matter what way God is leading you out of your comfort zone, be amazed and know that God has great things in store for you.
Now, they shared with me some questions that they get asked, some of the more common questions they get asked by other people who are considering getting involved in these ministries themselves. And so I want to ask them some of those questions and let them answer for you. I may have changed the wording a little bit, but you'll get the. I might even change the order too. But I wanted you guys to hear from them some of the more common questions, and then again, they're going to be here. We got some representatives from some other organizations here in Northwest Arkansas, and they will be here in the lobby. And I invite you not to run off when worship is over with today, but to spend some time, if nothing else, thanking these folks for being involved in these important ministries the way that they are. Now, first question. As far as, let's talk about foster care first. Just the process of getting involved and getting kids into your home. How long is that process? How tedious is it? That may be too big a question, but how long does that take? I mean, is it like, hey, I sign up and next week I get kids, or is it? I'm assuming it's a little more detailed than that.
It's a little more detailed than that. Yes, we see, depending on how capable and on top of it you are with your own paperwork, that you can be open anywhere from 5 to 6 months from the time that you come to an informational meeting. So if you were going to go through, say, the call to become an open foster home, you'd attend an informational meeting, you'd turn in background checks, those go off to Little Rock, and it takes about a month for them to come back. You'd sign up for 30 hours of training that we perform over 2 weekends at no cost to you. And then once you've completed the training, you'll go through a home study process where someone is going to come to your home 2 or 3 times, meet with you and your spouse, with your children who are of an age to speak, and learn more about your family and write your story. It's similar to adoption in that respect. And then you go, once all that gets approved, then you're open and ready to start taking kids.
Okay. If with the adoption process, I mean, you mentioned Miss Brittany. How much contact, and I'm guessing that the stories are different for everybody, but in general, do you know how much contact like a birth parent has with the adopted child, and what's that process like?
So it is on a case-by-case basis. Every story is different. Both of the and I'm assuming that it's different depending on the agencies that you go through. Both of the agencies that we went through allowed that to be a joint decision between the birth family or birth parents. Sometimes the birth father's involved, sometimes he's not, and the adoptive family. So in our case, with Madeline's birth mother, it's considered a closed adoption, so we know her by first name only. We will send, I should be better about it than I am, send periodic updates to the agency, so they kind of act as a facilitator between her birth parents and us, so that we will send her updates and pictures through the agency. She can get them when she feels comfortable and ready for them. With Noah's, his is considered to be an open adoption, so I text her whenever I'm thinking about it, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and has he met her?
Mm-hmm. Both of my children have met her. She's considered kind of an extension of our family. So if you think of like an aunt or something that lives out of state, we know her well. She's part of the family, but not an everyday part of your family.
Okay, very good. This is a question, and you can start to answer if you want, but definitely want to hear, especially from the foster care perspective. As far as like a financial commitment, obviously, if you're going to have a child, you're going to adopt a child, it's like having your own child. Obviously, there's going to be a greater financial responsibility, but also from the foster care perspective, what could people expect as far as, is it a huge financial burden? Is it, and that may be a loaded question, of course, having a new child in your home, but anyway.
So for private adoption, That's one of the most common issues to overcome with private adoption. There is a substantial financial obligation or whatever, and the reason it's often questioned, why does it cost so much to go through the adoption process? And the answer is that for private adoption, they're not getting any state funding to keep their doors open. So like with Bethany Christian, and we have a rep out in our lobby today, but they provide counseling and social workers and legal and all of these fees, and just to keep their doors open and available, and advertising so that potential birth mothers know that they're there and that their services are there. None of that is funded other than through the fees that the adoptive parents pay. And so we had a pretty substantial financial obligation to overcome. And I remember that the first time we went to an orientation with Madeline, one of the men that were there as part of that agency had equated it, and it stood out in my mind, and it made a lot of sense that you could equate those kinds of fees about the same as buying a new car. It's really that large. However, we don't think twice when financing a new vehicle. That's just something that you do and something that you overcome, and you figure out how to make it work. And so if you're going to do that for a car, wouldn't you want to do the same thing for your kids? And of course the answer is going to be no. And the other nice thing is that there is a tax credit that after the adoption is final, you do not get it all back. Don't let me kid you there. But you do get some financial help after you file your taxes after the adoption's been finalized.
Okay.
Thankfully, that tax credit is still on the books so far right now. You guys talk to your representatives about that. That's also available to people who adopt through foster care if your child has special needs.
I had this one. I was actually, but anyway, it's all right. So yes, on foster care, yes, it's actually much cheaper than international adoption. Which, yeah, I mean, you're looking at $35,000 domestic adoption. Yeah, new car. So foster care, obviously, yeah, you have to be prepared, but there's stipends, monthly. The average is something slightly over $400 a month per child. If you're doing it right, obviously you probably spend more than that on many in this room probably spend more than that on their biological children. So obviously you should always make it fair. We do see that occasionally when, unfortunately, foster homes don't treat their kids the same, which is horrible to see. Also, this is also, if anybody's thinking about doing it, we also expect you to take your kids on a vacation that you're planning. So if you're open for foster care and you're planning a vacation, you should expect kids to go on the vacation.
Don't leave the foster kids at the house and take your
exactly.
own kids. Okay.
Yes.
I got you.
Which unfortunately we see that as well, even through the call. These Christian homes open up and then want to do something with their kids while they go on their vacation. Mm-hmm. So, and then if you decide to adopt, it's like it's such a trivial amount. It's surprising that it's even out there. It's like $25 for some kind of court cost for the adoption, which is, yes, ridiculously cheap, and you can still get the tax credit as well. So, and then there's even cases where if they're considered special needs, which is very broad, and you adopt almost any child besides an infant, sometimes there's even ongoing stipends until they're 18. So, yes, the financial burden is not as great on that side. Medicaid and their health insurance. You put them on your health insurance, but they also get health insurance until they're 18 or 21. That picks up all the other kids. So medical.
Basically what both of y'all are saying is there's obviously a financial responsibility, but it's not insurmountable. It's something that if you're willing to be a part of, that's just it's just part of the process. It's not something that's an obstacle that you can't overcome. Okay. As far as, let's talk about foster care for a second. Can you specify what kind of kids you want in your home, or is it just you get a call and you need to, he's not giving the mic back.
Keeping it. Yeah, so, but that's the part that plays in. God has bigger plans than you have. So, yes, you can, stipulate and you write down, and it's a very sad list of things that you're willing to take on. I mean, they have a list of all the, different physical, possible, and mental challenges that you can deal with, and it's unfortunate. You fill that out and you say you only want kids under 10, or you only want, girls above a certain age. Obviously, there is a concern with, teenage boys in your home for most people. But yeah, so you're going to get calls, and you're going to get lots of calls, and you think you only want 2 kids, and you end up with 4 foster kids, and then it does create communication. You definitely want to be on the same page with your spouse on and who should take the phone calls that come. So it all works out though, and God stretches you a lot. So
Just to confirm, you set a standard, and it's all in writing. They're going to call you anyway, because there's such a high need for foster families. And I think the recurring theme between all of us seems to be that we all went in with a plan, and God had a different plan, and you just have to be open to listening to that and being willing to make the sacrifices necessary to walk in that path.
Yeah. Did you specify, or can you specify with adoption?
You can. You can specify. I think it probably depends on the agency and what their criteria are. You can specify any. I know you can usually specify age. We did not specify. No, we definitely did not specify gender. That was up to God. I think you can usually specify race and some of those criteria, but also depending on the agency and how their procedures work, you may get notifications of potential children that are ready to be adopted that didn't fit your ideal, but maybe after seeing that particular situation, God opens your heart to something different.
Okay. Real quick, and I appreciate everybody's attention. We're going to wrap this up in just a minute. I asked you guys ahead of time to be thinking about this answer. So what's one of the biggest challenges that you faced that you and Scott faced with the adoption process?
For us, and I alluded to, it was the wait, not knowing, I wanted my plan realized in my timing, not in God's timing, and sitting day after day, not knowing when and how he was going to fulfill. I believed he had a plan, but I wanted to know what that plan was so that I could be on board with him. I didn't want to sit here not knowing. That's me, but that was the hardest, just not knowing when, how long, what are you doing, are you even listening, God?
What's been one of the biggest challenges as far as fostering?
I think we're each going to share one. Did you have a different? I wanted to share. For foster care, obviously, the primary focus is getting those children back into their homes with their biological families, if at all possible. And so that's one of the biggest challenges is letting go. When I think most of you, or a lot of you here, know our son Jay and how precious he is. You may not remember that the same time that Jay came to our home, another little boy came to our home. And we had them for the same amount of time. He very quickly became best friends with our biological daughter, Audrey. They spent all their time together. I remember they would dress with their superhero costumes on under their clothes, their regular street clothes, because you never know when the need for a superhero will arise.
That's true.
And they spent their days prepared to be that hero. The day before we adopted our son Jay, we got a call from our other son's resource worker saying that God had moved mountains for him, and it was time for him to go home to his family. We were not expecting that so quickly, and it was a hard thing to hear. And I remember being stunned and saying, "Okay, that's great. We have our adoption first thing in the morning tomorrow. So if you could come after that, we'll try to get him packed up tonight." We said our goodbyes, we got him packed up, we went to adoption, and we came home, and we waited, and nobody called. And it got to be about 6 o'clock at night, and I called the caseworker myself, and I said, "Hey, are you still going to be able to come take him home today?" And she said, as happened so many times, she She had taken kids into care that day. 2 other families had called her to disrupt placements from their own homes, and she was trying to find placements for them. She's like, I can't get out there today. I might be staying the night with the kids in my office. I probably can get to them. This was a Tuesday. I can probably get to them on Thursday. And I hung up the phone, and I told Ryan, I was like, if I was in his family's shoes and I knew that I could have him today, I would want him today and not on Thursday. So we called back and we asked if we could do it ourselves. And she gave us permission to do that. We loaded up the car. We took him to his family's home. We'd been in contact with them throughout the case and then built a relationship with them. And we were able to restore him with his family. We were able to hug them and tell them how much we've been praying for them and how happy we were for their reunification. And obviously, it's still a very hard thing for me to think on. It was a very hard thing to do, but it was by far the most rewarding experience of my life to be able to put him back in the arms of his family and know that God had knit that family back together and that we got to be a part of that. So it is one of the hardest things about foster care, but it is one of the biggest joys of foster care as well.
Yep. And just to finish on that. And he came to our house a couple weeks later and spent the night, and we stayed in close contact for another 1.5 years. But as I was tucking him into bed, he asked why he couldn't stay at our house, which was just heartbreaking. And even Audrey, like 3 months later, after he hadn't lived at our house, right out here, fell to her knees and just sobbed because he didn't live with us anymore. So this leads into, I'm just going to answer a quick question. This is going to be a bit rambling. I'm just going to get all my stuff in. This leads into my, one of the questions that we get asked most often is, I don't know how you do it. You can get so attached, and I just couldn't do that. And people don't realize how selfish that sounds, because it's not about you. It's about God's plan, and you stepping up and serving a child. And I want to tell a quick story about a child, and then the difficulties, the challenges I have with that, and that I've had it with foster care and asking why. 6-year-old boy shows up to our house with his younger sister who's 1.5 years old, and you can see the fear, you can see the confusion. You don't know the stories, but you assume, there's some kind of physical abuse, there's some kind of severe neglect. This boy should be out, he's got, faded jeans and a monster truck t-shirt and boots, and he should be out playing and not have a care in the world. But he's there with his little sister, and he's asking questions about where's her stuff, what's happening next, and asking these things that he shouldn't have to deal with while he's in pain and trying to be strong for his sister who's 1.5 years old. And while he's there, he's only there for a day. We're watching him while the caseworker has to take care of all these other things, and his sister makes a mess, and he quickly, tries to clean it up. And you think, what's happened to him? Has he been punished severely for making messes? And how scared of us is he? And how do we deal with that? And we're only there for 8 hours, and the caseworker comes back and picks him up. And again, you can see, pretty much all day long, but you can see the confusion and the pain. And why does this child have to deal with this? And you wonder some days. I still think about this child 5 years later. Did he get to stay with? Did they get to go back home? Did he get to stay with his sister, or did they get split up? And how much pain does this child have to deal with? And are there some pains that can never be healed? And that's when you have to step out on faith. And there's a lot of struggles that we had to deal with that you don't know. I didn't know faith until I had to deal with some of these things. You don't know how you're going to wake up the next day and deal with some of the challenges you never expected. But that's when you have to trust in God. And there's huge questions that come with, again, why is this world so broken? And you haven't seen the broken world until you've had to deal with these children that you hear about, but you haven't met the child that's been sexually abused. You haven't met the child that's had burns because their parents are mentally disabled. And it's a big, big weight. And it's a challenge. So
I appreciate you guys sharing. I appreciate you sharing your hearts today. I appreciate you guys letting God use you in the way that he has. I hope you continue to let him do that. Let's give these folks a hand for sharing their stories today. Thank you. As I said a few minutes ago, you guys have done an outstanding job of giving your focus and attention as these families share with you today, and I'm thankful for that. I appreciate that. If you'll stick with me for just another minute or two, I just want to share some thoughts with you about what we've been talking about today. The song we just sang was intentional. It's a song that says, we have these ancient words of Christ. We have the ancient words of God, these words that were given to us hundreds, thousands of years ago originally, and have continued to pass through generations. And of all the things in this world that have remained true, it's the words of God. And that's important when we're talking about having room for the fatherless, having room for these kids who don't have a family of their own or don't have a functional family, however we would define that, to be a part of. If you go back and you look in your New Testament towards the end of your Bibles in James chapter 1, and James is sharing with the people who are reading his particular letter all these different things. If you're going to be a Christian, if you're going to wear the name of Christ, here's some things you have to implement into your life. Here's some things you have to be a part of. Here's some things, some actions that you have to take on a daily basis. And in the middle of all that, in James chapter 1 and verse 27, James says this, that religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this. Now, before we read what that is, understand what James is saying here. Of all the different things about worshiping God and serving God and the process of doing that and what's acceptable to God in that process, to remove all impurity from that, to remove anything from our human selves that we tend to add to stuff that God wants and end up sometimes just messing things up. James says if you want to do it right, if you want to worship God and serve God in the correct way on a continuous basis, here's what you do. You look after the orphans and the widows, and you try to keep yourself from being polluted by things in this world. And I spend an awful lot of time talking with you and sharing with you about the second part. Trying to keep from being polluted by this world and recognizing the evil and the sin in this world and the temptations that are there. And we struggle with those on a daily basis. And we talk together, we share together about how to resist those temptations, how to stay away from them when we give into them. What do we do about that? We spend an awful lot of time talking about that. And maybe to a fault, at least I don't focus enough on the first part that James says here. You want to be the kind of person God wants you to be? Look after the orphans and the widows. And it's not just that James is talking about specifically, hey, only look after orphans, don't worry about your own kids. He's not saying that. And he's not saying only look after widows and any other people, don't worry about them, they can fend for themselves, but you need to take care of widows. The principle is, if there are helpless people who can't take care of themselves, step up. You be the one to do something about that. Because there's room at the table for them. And they need to be a part of your life. They need to be blessed by you. They need to be taken care of by you. If you have the capacity and the opportunity to do that, then do that. So specifically this morning, we're talking about kids. We're talking about kids who don't have parents of their own that can be adopted. We're talking about kids who are being pulled from homes because of whatever the situation is and need a safe, loving place to be. And James says, that needs to be us, church. That needs to be us to step up and get involved in that somehow. That's what it looks like to serve God. And here's the reason. Go back to the Old Testament, all the way towards the beginning of the Bible, to Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy chapter 10, so this would be about 1,500-ish years before James wrote what he wrote. God says this in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 18. As he's talking about, as Moses is talking about him, talking about the God we serve, it says that he defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And what I want you to understand is that 1,500 years later, James is saying those ancient words from hundreds of years ago are still true today. God wants us to look after the fatherless. Why? Because he does. It's part of his nature to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. And if we are going to wear his name and we are going to be his children and we are going to serve him, then we're going to have to do what he does. And if he is passionate about the fatherless, we need to be too. I'm not trying to guilt anybody into anything this morning, and none of these folks that were up here were either. You may not feel like you can get involved in the way that these families have in adoption or foster care or whatever. But you can get involved somehow. There's some way that you can be a part of these families who are inviting these children into their home or bless these ministries in some form or fashion. I don't want any of us to leave here this morning going, well, that was a good Sunday, but that's for somebody else, not me. We're not left with that option. And whether it's contributing financially, whether it's prayer, whether it's actively becoming a part of these ministries, church, we need to be doing something. Not because the preacher or anybody else is going to try and make us feel guilty if we don't, but because we wear the name of Christ. We are children of God, and if we are going to be like him in this world, we need to do what he would do in this world. And if he defends the fatherless, we need to as well. I'll wrap up with this. There's an odd analogy that God gives in the book of Ezekiel. So if you're looking at your table of contents, it's kind of right in the middle. Ezekiel was a prophet for God's people about the time that they were completely full of sin and completely godless, and not long before he allowed his people to be completely conquered by another nation because they had become so godless. And God is describing his relationship with his children. And he describes a newborn baby who wasn't wanted by its parents. And in Ezekiel chapter 16, he describes his people like a child that's just been born. And he says in verse 5, "No one looked on you with pity or had compassion. Rather, you were thrown out into the open field. From the day you were born, you were despised." And if we saw that happen nowadays, we couldn't even hardly fathom it. The mental picture of seeing a child born and the parents going, and throwing it out in a field. I mean, I remember years ago the movie Cold Mountain coming out. Anybody ever seen that movie, Cold Mountain? It's a horribly depressing movie. Don't watch it. But anyway, it's set during Civil War times. And there's this one scene where this mom has, in kind of a frontier area, has an almost newborn wrapped up in cloths, and it's got pneumonia. But they're trying to get these guys that are hiding out in the woods to come out and show themselves. And so they take her baby from her, and they lay it out in the open ground in front of the house and remove all the blankets from it. It's out there in the cold. And she is screaming for her baby, and they're holding her back. She can't defend her baby because they want these soldiers to come out of the woods and come to her rescue. See, I'm telling you, don't even watch the movie. It's terrible. I'm saying we didn't know anything about this movie. My wife and I were watching it years ago in the movie theater, and when they lay that baby out and it's crying and coughing, my wife is standing up in the theater going, "Somebody help that baby. Oh my goodness, give me that baby." I mean, she's freaking out. I know, y'all are going, "I can see you're doing it." She did. We can't fathom somebody doing this, but in the time where Ezekiel lived, this was not completely uncommon. And God is saying, "I came across and I found you unloved and unwanted, like an unwanted child. That's how I found you." And he goes on the next verse in verse 6, and God says, "I passed by and I saw you kicking in your blood. And I looked at you and I said, live." And I share that with you this morning because our God is a God who has compassion on helpless, defenseless children, which sometimes we are. We are trying to survive in this world, and we keep making choices and doing harmful things to ourselves and to other people. We struggle to find acceptance. We struggle to experience grace and love, and our God lavishes it on us. And all those times when we feel like we're not accepted, like we're not good enough, like we're not worth anything, our God wraps us up in his arms and says, live. I want to give you life. I want to give you grace. I want to give you acceptance. I want to give you hope. That's the kind of God that we serve. And because we've experienced that from our Father, we have the opportunity to share that with kids who haven't experienced that before. I hope that makes sense. We have kids in this community, as blessed as we are, as much as we see all the different lists of this is the place in the United States to move to and how awesome it is to live here. We've got kids in our neighborhoods who desperately need to be shown grace and compassion and love and acceptance, who desperately need somebody to wrap their arms around and say, I want to give you life, I want to give you hope, even if it's for a few days. Let's be a church that does that. And let's be reminded this morning how we've experienced that through God, how we've experienced that through the cross. We're going to do what we traditionally do every Sunday. In just a moment, we're going to stand together and we're going to sing a song together. And we're going to sing about how our God knows who we are. He knows our name. He knows everything about us, as a good dad would. And I would invite you, if you're sitting there this morning and you don't know what it's like to experience the compassion, the grace, and the acceptance, the hope of a loving Father, I would invite you to come forward and say, I'm ready to experience that today, and we'll help make that happen. If you've walked away from that connection, that relationship, I would invite you to come forward and say, I've been so far away from home for so long, I'm ready to live again. And we'll help make that happen. If you've been moved this morning in some way to say, I don't know what it looks like, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm ready to get involved in these ministries that we talked about, I would even encourage you, if you want to come share that with us, and we'll celebrate together that you're going to get plugged in. But we're going to spend just a moment being reminded of how loved we are by our Father and how we have the opportunity to show that love to others. And if you have a need, we want to help. While together we stand and sing.